They called her the weirdo. Day after day, the whispers followed her through the halls like shadows she couldn't shake. Emma Richards wasn't like the others at Westfield High, and they made sure she knew it. While everyone obsessed over the same trends, the same music, the same vacant conversations, she existed in a different universe entirely. She read philosophy at lunch. She sketched abstract patterns in the margins of her notebooks. She asked questions that made teachers uncomfortable. And for that she was labeled, dismissed, erased before she even had a chance to be seen. The lunch table incident happened on a Tuesday. Emma sat alone, as usual, when Madison Clare and her circle approached. Madison wasn't just popular, she was the architect of social hierarchies, the one who decided who mattered and who didn't. She placed her tray down with exaggerated delicacy and looked at Emma with that particular smile reserved for people she was about to destroy. "So, Emma," Madison began, loud enough for surrounding tables to hear, "still pretending you're too deep for the rest of us? Still acting like you're special?" The cafeteria grew quieter. These moments always drew an audience. Emma looked up from her book, her heart already racing but her face carefully neutral. "I'm not pretending anything," she said softly. Madison laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut. "Right. You're just naturally useless. Can't fit in. Can't be normal. Can't be anything, really." Her friends echoed the laughter, a chorus of cruelty that Emma had learned to expect but never got used to. The word useless hung in the air like smoke. Emma felt it settle into her chest, adding weight to the collection of similar words she'd been carrying for years. Freak, weird, worthless. Different had always meant defective in this place. She wanted to respond, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat the way they always did. Instead, she gathered her things with shaking hands and left the cafeteria while Madison's voice followed her. "Yeah, run away. That's all you're good at." The hallway was empty and cold. Emma pressed her back against a locker and tried to breathe through the humiliation. She'd survived worse. She'd survived this. But something about that word, useless, felt different. It wasn't just cruel. It was definitive, a verdict she'd been handed without trial. The rest of the day moved in a fog. Teachers spoke, but Emma didn't hear them. Classmates existed around her like ghosts. She moved through it all mechanically, thinking about Madison's face, that smile, that absolute certainty that Emma Richards was nothing and would always be nothing. By the time she got home, the anger had started to simmer beneath the numbness. Her mother was working late again. The house was silent. Emma stood in her bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror mounted on her closet door. Who was this person staring back? The girl everyone dismissed? The one who apologized for existing? The one who made herself smaller and quieter, hoping that would be enough to escape notice? She thought about all the times she'd accepted their judgment. All the times she'd believed the labels they gave her. Different, useless, wrong. Something shifted in that moment. Not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden revelation, just a quiet, steady decision forming in the space behind her ribs. She picked up her phone and opened the Notes app, her fingers moving before her mind could catch up. She started writing, not about her pain, not about her humiliation, but about every idea she'd ever had and pushed down, every thought she'd deemed too strange to share, every observation she'd kept locked away because it didn't fit the narrow definition of acceptable. She wrote about the patterns she saw in human behavior, the contradictions in what people said versus what they did. The beautiful complexity of existing outside predetermined boxes. She wrote until her hands cramped, until the words spilled out faster than she could capture them, until she looked up and realized 3 hours had passed and she'd filled 40 pages with thoughts she didn't even know she'd been holding. This was who she was. This mind that moved differently. This perspective that saw angles others missed. This wasn't a flaw. This was her power. They'd called her useless. Tomorrow she'd show them exactly how wrong they were. Emma didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. The anger had transformed into something else, something focused and deliberate. She sat at her desk until dawn broke through her window, her laptop screen glowing in the darkness, her mind racing with a clarity she'd never experienced before. She wasn't planning revenge in the traditional sense. She was planning something far more powerful. She was planning to become undeniable. By 6 in the morning, she had a website framework built. By 7, she'd outlined her first 20 pieces of content. By 8, she'd recorded her first video essay. The topic? Why being different is your greatest asset in a world that celebrates mediocrity. She spoke directly into her phone camera. No script, no polish, just raw honesty about what it felt like to be dismissed for seeing the world through a different lens. She talked about the loneliness of being misunderstood, the exhaustion of pretending to care about things that felt meaningless, the quiet desperation of wondering if something was fundamentally broken inside you. And then she talked about the lie embedded in that question. Nothing was broken. The system that demanded conformity was broken. The social structures that punished originality were broken. The people who felt threatened by anyone who dared to think independently were broken. She uploaded the video to a new YouTube channel she created that morning. The name? The Useless Truth. She took the word Madison had weaponized against her and turned it into her banner. Her description read, "For everyone who's been called too much or not enough, for the ones who don't fit, this is your space." She posted the link on her personal social media with one line, "They said I was useless. Here's what useless looks like." Then she went to school. The exhaustion should have destroyed her, but adrenaline kept her spine straight and her head up. She walked into Westfield High differently that morning. Not with arrogance, not with the desperate energy of someone trying to prove something, but with the quiet confidence of someone who'd stopped seeking approval from people whose opinions no longer mattered. Madison saw her first. Emma caught the look of surprise that flashed across her face when Emma didn't immediately avert her eyes. Emma didn't smile, didn't challenge, just walked past like Madison was part of the scenery, unremarkable, unimportant. Throughout the day, she noticed something strange. People were looking at their phones, then looking at her. Whispers followed her, but they felt different. Less mocking, more curious, confused. By lunch, she understood why. Her video had gone viral, not massively, not millions of views, but it had been shared across multiple school social media pages. Students from Westfield and neighboring schools had found it. The comments section was exploding. "This is exactly how I feel. I've never heard someone put this into words. I thought I was the only one. This girl gets it." The view count kept climbing. 3,000, 5,000, 8,000. Emma sat at her usual lunch table, alone but no longer lonely, and watched the numbers rise. She saw classmates watching the video on their phones. Some looked uncomfortable. Others nodded along. A few cried. Madison's table was silent for the first time in memory. Emma didn't look in their direction, but she could feel the shift in energy. The power dynamic had cracked. By the end of the school day, Emma had received 47 direct messages from students she'd never spoken to. Some thanked her. Some shared their own stories of feeling like outsiders. Some asked how she found the courage to speak so openly. One message stood out. It was from a junior named Marcus Chen, someone Emma recognized but had never interacted with. "I was planning to drop out," he wrote. "Your video made me reconsider. Thank you for saying what I couldn't." Emma stared at those words until they blurred. This was what useless looked like. Impact, connection, the courage to be honest in a world that rewarded performance. That night, she created 3 more videos. Each one explored a different aspect of the outsider experience: the loneliness, the self-doubt, the eventual realization that being different wasn't a curse, but a perspective most people were too afraid to develop. She talked about Madison without naming her, about the people who needed to diminish others to feel significant, about the trap of seeking validation from those who were threatened by authenticity. The videos spread faster than the first. Within a week, Emma's channel had 20,000 subscribers. Within 2 weeks, 50,000. Comments poured in from around the world. People twice her age thanking her for articulating feelings they'd carried for decades. Teenagers sending her photos of themselves with captions like "proudly useless" and "different and done apologizing." Media outlets started reaching out. Local news wanted interviews. Online publications requested articles. A literary agent contacted her about turning her thoughts into a book. And through it all, Emma kept going to Westfield High, kept sitting at her lunch table, kept being exactly who she'd always been. Except now she wasn't invisible. Madison tried to adapt. She posted her own video, attempting to ride the wave of Emma's success with generic motivational content about being yourself and embracing uniqueness. It got 43 views and was roasted in the comments for its obvious inauthenticity. The other popular kids who'd participated in Emma's humiliation suddenly wanted to be associated with her. They complimented her videos in passing, asked about her process, pretended they'd always seen her potential. Emma was polite but distant. She didn't need their approval anymore. She'd found something far more valuable, a community of people who understood what it meant to exist outside the narrow definitions of acceptable. 3 months after that cafeteria incident, Emma was invited to speak at a TEDx event for youth. The topic? The power of being useless in a productivity-obsessed world. She stood on that stage in front of 400 people and told her story. About Madison. About the word that was meant to destroy her. About the night she decided to reclaim it. About the thousands of messages from people who'd been waiting their entire lives for someone to tell them that being different wasn't something to fix. The video of her talk went viral immediately. 1 million views in 48 hours, 5 million within a week. Emma Richards, the girl who'd been called useless just months before, had become a voice for everyone who'd ever been dismissed for refusing to conform. The transformation wasn't just external. Emma felt it in her bones, in the way she moved through the world now. 6 months after that cafeteria humiliation, she stood in the hallway at Westfield High and realized she no longer recognized the girl who'd run away crying. That version of herself felt like a distant memory, a ghost she'd outgrown. Her channel had crossed 200,000 subscribers. She'd been featured in 3 major publications. A publisher had offered her a book deal worth 6 figures. But none of that compared to the letters she received daily from people whose lives had changed because she'd refused to accept the label they'd given her. There was the mother who wrote about her autistic son finally feeling understood. The college student who'd abandoned a business degree to pursue art after watching Emma's videos. The middle-aged teacher who quit his job to start the non-profit he'd been dreaming about for 20 years. Emma had become accidental proof that the people society dismisses are often the ones with the most to offer. She'd shown that being called useless by small-minded people was often a sign you were doing something important. Madison never apologized, not directly. But Emma noticed the changes. Madison stopped holding court in the cafeteria. Her inner circle had fractured, with several former members now following Emma's content and posting about authenticity and self-acceptance. Madison's social media presence had shifted from curated perfection to something slightly more honest, though it still rang hollow compared to Emma's raw vulnerability. One afternoon, Emma found herself alone in the library with Madison for the first time since everything had changed. The silence stretched between them like an ocean. Madison looked up from her phone, and for just a moment, Emma saw something unexpected in her eyes. Not hatred, not resentment. Something closer to envy mixed with regret. "You really did it," Madison said quietly. Her voice lacked its usual edge. "You became something." Emma considered her response carefully. She could be cruel. She could throw Madison's words back at her. She could make her feel the way Emma had felt that day in the cafeteria, but she didn't. "I was always something," Emma replied. "You just couldn't see it because you were too busy trying to make yourself feel bigger by making others feel small." Madison flinched, opened her mouth, closed it again. "I didn't know," she finally said. "It wasn't an apology, but it was close." Emma nodded. "Now you do." She gathered her things and left Madison sitting there, alone with the weight of her own choices. Emma felt no triumph in that moment, no satisfaction in Madison's discomfort, just a quiet acknowledgement that some people spend their whole lives building pedestals out of other people's pain, never realizing how unstable that foundation is. She'd moved beyond needing Madison to understand. beyond needing anyone's validation except her own. The real proof came at graduation. Emma had been selected as class speaker, chosen by a student vote that wasn't even close. As she stood at the podium looking out at her classmates, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the girl who ate lunch alone and tried to disappear, to the person now representing her entire graduating class. She didn't mention Madison in her speech, didn't reference the cafeteria incident directly. Instead, she talked about the gift of being underestimated, about how the people who doubted you were actually giving you the freedom to become something they couldn't imagine, about how the most powerful transformations happened when you stopped trying to fit into spaces that were never built for you and started building your own. To everyone who's ever been called too weird, too sensitive, too different, too much or not enough, Emma said, her voice carrying across the auditorium, your difference isn't a flaw in your design. It's the entire point. The world doesn't need more people who know how to fit in. It needs people brave enough to stand out. And if standing out means some people will call you useless, then wear that label like armor. Because the people who matter will see your worth. And the people who don't aren't worth your time trying to convince. The applause was deafening. Students stood, parents cried. Even teachers who'd once dismissed her as a distraction were on their feet. Emma saw Madison in the crowd, sitting motionless while everyone around her celebrated. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Emma saw the full weight of Madison's realization that she'd be remembered as the villain in someone else's success story. After the ceremony, Emma was surrounded by classmates wanting photos and signatures, people she'd never spoken to treating her like she'd always mattered to them. She was gracious but detached, understanding that this moment wasn't about vindication or revenge. It was about proof that the narrative people write about you in your lowest moment doesn't have to be your ending, proof that the opinions of people who've never tried to understand you are worthless. Proof that your value isn't determined by consensus. Later that night, Emma sat in her bedroom, the same room where she'd made the decision that changed everything. Her phone buzzed with messages from her online community celebrating her speech. Publishers wanted to expedite her book. A streaming platform had reached out about a documentary series. Multiple universities were offering full scholarships. She thought about that day in the cafeteria. About Madison's voice saying useless like it was an immutable fact. About the girl she'd been who almost believed it. That girl would never have imagined this life, would never have believed that pain could be transformed into purpose, that humiliation could become fuel, that the very thing meant to destroy her could become the foundation of everything she built. Emma opened her laptop and started writing her next video. The title: Thank You to Everyone Who Underestimated Me. Because in a strange way, Madison had given her a gift. Not intentionally, not kindly, but effectively. She'd pushed Emma to a breaking point that became a breakthrough. She'd forced Emma to choose between accepting someone else's definition of her worth or defining it herself. The video would be Emma's most viewed yet. It would inspire another wave of people to reclaim the words that had been used to hurt them. It would cement Emma's reputation as someone who turned pain into power without becoming cruel in the process. But more than any external success, Emma had gained something Madison would never understand. She'd learned that the people who try to make you feel small are usually the ones who feel smallest inside. That true strength isn't about dominating others, but about refusing to let others dominate you. That being called useless by someone who's never created anything meaningful is actually a compliment in disguise. She'd learned that your response to cruelty defines you more than the cruelty itself. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but releasing the weight of someone else's judgment so you can move forward unencumbered. That the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming so genuinely content with who you are that the opinions of people who tried to break you become irrelevant noise you barely register. Emma saved her draft and looked at her reflection in the dark computer screen. She saw a person who'd been tested and had passed, who'd been dismissed and had proven the dismissal wrong, who'd been called useless and had built something undeniably valuable from that rejection. She saw someone who'd learned the most important lesson life could teach, that no one gets to define you but you, and that's the definition that matters most. 5 years later, Emma stood in a Los Angeles conference room overlooking the city, preparing for a meeting that would have seemed impossible to that 17-year-old girl crying in a high school hallway. Her book, Useless: Why Being Different is Your Superpower, had spent 32 weeks on the bestseller list. Her YouTube channel had grown to over 3 million subscribers. She'd spoken at universities across 3 continents. Major corporations hired her to consult on workplace culture and authentic leadership. She'd built an entire media company focused on amplifying voices that traditionally got silenced. But this meeting was different. This was personal. Her assistant knocked softly. "They're here." Emma took a breath and turned from the window. Walking through the door was a group of 7 people, ranging from teenagers to adults in their 40s. They looked nervous, excited, uncertain. These were the finalists for the mentorship program Emma had created, a year-long intensive for people who'd been told they were too different, too strange, too unmarketable to succeed. People who had ideas that didn't fit conventional molds, people like she'd been. Among them was a girl who reminded Emma startlingly of her younger self. Quiet. Uncomfortable in her own skin. Eyes that held worlds she was afraid to share. The girl's application essay had destroyed Emma. It detailed years of bullying for being neurodivergent, for processing information differently, for seeing patterns others missed. She'd been called useless by teachers who didn't understand her, worthless by classmates who feared her difference. The essay ended with a line that made Emma cry, "I don't know if I have anything valuable to offer the world." But Emma Richards made me think maybe I do. Emma spent the next 3 hours with these 7 people, hearing their stories, understanding their struggles, seeing pieces of herself reflected in each of them. There was Marcus, a 23-year-old who'd been rejected from every traditional job for being too unconventional in interviews. Sarah, a 40-year-old mother who'd abandoned her artistic dreams after decades of being told she wasn't practical enough. David, a teenager who'd attempted suicide twice because he couldn't figure out how to exist in a world that seemed to have no space for him. Each story was unique. Each was also the same story Emma had lived. The story of people who didn't fit the mold, being told that meant something was wrong with them, rather than wrong with the mold. At the end of the meeting, the quiet girl raised her hand tentatively. "Can I ask you something?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Emma nodded encouragingly. "Do you ever still feel like that girl in the cafeteria? Like maybe they were right and you just got lucky?" The question hung in the air. Everyone was listening now. Emma could have given them an inspirational answer, could have said she'd completely transcended that pain. But she'd built her entire platform on radical honesty, and she wasn't about to abandon it now. "Yes," Emma said simply. "Not every day. But some days, absolutely. I still have moments where I hear Madison's voice telling me I'm useless, where I question whether everything I've built is real or just an elaborate denial of some fundamental flaw in who I am." The group looked shocked. This wasn't what they'd expected from someone so successful. "But here's what I've learned," Emma continued. "Those doubts don't mean Madison was right. They mean I'm human. They mean I carry scars from a time when I didn't know my own worth. And instead of seeing those scars as weakness, I've learned to see them as proof of survival, proof that I fought through the worst version of my own story and came out the other side." She leaned forward, making eye contact with each person in the room. "The people who hurt us don't get to determine our ending just because they wrote one painful chapter. Every day we choose to keep going, to keep creating, to keep being authentically ourselves despite what we've been told. That's the real transformation. Not becoming someone different. Becoming more fully who we've always been." The quiet girl's eyes filled with tears. "I've spent so long trying to fix myself," she whispered, "trying to figure out what's broken so I can repair it and finally be acceptable." Emma's chest tightened. She remembered that feeling. That exhausting, endless effort to contort yourself into something others could tolerate. "Nothing's broken," Emma said firmly. "You're not a problem that needs solving. You're a person who needs space to exist as you are. And that's what this program is about. Not fixing you, amplifying you." Over the next year, Emma worked with those 7 people intensively. She taught them what she'd learned about building platforms, finding audiences, turning pain into purpose. But more importantly, she taught them what no one had taught her, that they were worthy before the success, before the validation, before anyone else recognized their value. The quiet girl's name was Lily Morrison. Over 12 months, Emma watched her transform, not by changing who she was, but by finally accepting it. Lily created a podcast about neurodivergent experiences that went viral within 3 months. She wrote essays that major publications fought to feature. She built a community of thousands of people who'd felt as invisible as she once had. Near the end of the program, Lily asked Emma to meet for coffee. They sat in a small cafe in Silver Lake, and Lily pulled out a letter. "I wrote this the night before I applied to your program," she said, sliding it across the table. "I was going to mail it to you whether I got accepted or not, but I wanted to give it to you in person." Emma unfolded the paper with careful hands. The letter began, "Dear Emma, you saved my life and you don't even know it." Emma read about the night Lily had planned to end everything, about how she'd been scrolling through social media one last time and stumbled on Emma's original video, the one she'd posted the morning after the cafeteria incident, about how hearing someone articulate the exact pain she'd been drowning in made her feel less alone for the first time in years, about how she'd watched every one of Emma's videos that night instead of following through with her plan, about how she'd decided to give life one more chance to surprise her. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel responsible for me," Lily had written. "I'm telling you because you need to know what happened when you chose to transform your pain instead of let it destroy you. You created a light that guided people out of darkness you didn't even know they were in." Emma finished reading with tears streaming down her face. The cafe blurred around her. She thought about that night 5 years ago when she'd written furiously in her bedroom, angry and hurt and determined to prove Madison wrong. She'd been thinking about herself, about her own survival. She'd had no idea that decision would ripple outward, touching lives she'd never meet, saving people she didn't know existed. "Thank you for showing me," Emma said when she could speak again. "For reminding me why this matters." Lily smiled, and Emma saw the same transformation she'd undergone reflected back at her, the same shift from apologizing for existence to claiming space in the world, the same journey from questioning your worth to knowing it with unshakable certainty. They talked for hours about the responsibility that came with influence, about staying grounded when success could easily inflate your ego, about the difference between using your platform to help others versus using others to build your platform. Lily was asking the kinds of questions Emma had wrestled with in private, and Emma found herself grateful for the company in that struggle. That evening, Emma returned to her apartment and opened her laptop. She hadn't posted a personal video in months, focusing instead on her other projects, but this felt important. She recorded herself talking about the meeting, about Lily's letter, about what it meant to transform pain into purpose, not just for yourself, but for everyone still fighting battles you've already survived. "When Madison called me useless that day in the cafeteria," Emma said into the camera, "she thought she was stating a fact. She thought she was putting me in my place. But what she actually did was give me a choice. I could accept her definition of my worth, or I could reject it entirely and build my own. I chose the latter, and that choice created a chain reaction I never could have predicted." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "If you're watching this and you've been called useless or worthless or too different to matter, I need you to hear something. The people who said those things to you were wrong. Not just a little wrong. Fundamentally, completely, catastrophically wrong. Your difference isn't a flaw. It's often the most valuable thing about you. The world doesn't need more people who fit in. It needs people who have the courage to stand out, even when standing out means standing alone for a while." Emma looked directly into the lens, speaking to every person who'd ever felt like that lonely girl in the cafeteria. "You are not useless. You are not broken. You are not too much or not enough. You're exactly what this world needs, even if the people around you right now can't see it. And one day, when you've built something beautiful from the pain they caused you, when you've transformed rejection into purpose and loneliness into community, you'll look back and realize that being dismissed by small-minded people was actually the greatest gift they could have given you. because it forced you to stop seeking their approval and start creating something so undeniably valuable that their opinions became irrelevant. She posted the video at midnight. By morning, it had 2 million views. By the end of the week, it had crossed 15 million. The comment section became a digital monument to human resilience. Thousands of people shared their stories of being dismissed, rejected, told they'd never amount to anything. A woman in her 60s wrote about finally starting the business she'd dreamed of for 40 years after watching Emma's journey. A teenager described how Emma's words stopped him from dropping out of school. A father talked about showing the video to his daughter, who'd been bullied for being autistic, and how it was the first time he'd seen her smile in months. Parents thanked Emma for giving their children hope. Teachers apologized for the students they'd failed to see. Former bullies wrote confessions about the damage they'd caused and the regret they carried. The video became more than content. It became a turning point for countless people who'd been waiting for permission to believe in themselves. Emma's phone exploded with interview requests. Major networks wanted her story. Oprah's team reached out. A Hollywood producer wanted to option her life rights for a film. But the message that stopped Emma cold came from an unexpected source. It was a direct message on Instagram from an account she didn't recognize. The profile picture was generic. No posts, no followers. Just a message that read, "This is Madison. I don't expect you to respond. I don't deserve your time. But I needed to say this. I'm sorry." Emma stared at those 2 words for a long time. Part of her wanted to delete the message. Another part was curious. She clicked on the account and realized it was new, created just hours earlier. Madison had made it specifically to reach out. Against her better judgment, Emma opened the message thread and read the rest. "I've watched everything you've built. I've read every interview. I've seen how many people you've helped. And I've had to sit with the reality that I'm the villain in your origin story. I'm the person who tried to destroy you. I know saying sorry doesn't change what I did. It doesn't undo the pain or erase the cruelty. But I need you to know that what I said to you that day has haunted me every single day since. Not because of what you became, but because of who you always were, and I was too insecure to see it." The message continued. "I've spent 5 years in therapy trying to understand why I needed to hurt people to feel powerful. Trying to unpack the damage I caused because I was so afraid of being irrelevant that I made other people feel invisible. You weren't the only one I hurt. You were just the one who refused to stay broken. I'm writing this because I'm trying to do the same thing now, trying to transform my shame into something better. I volunteer with anti-bullying programs. I speak to kids about the long-term consequences of cruelty. I'm trying to become someone who builds people up instead of tearing them down. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm trying to make sure my future is different. You don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me anything. I just needed you to know that I see now what I was too blind to see then. You were never useless. I was just afraid of how powerful you'd become if you believed in yourself." Emma read the message 3 times. Her emotions were complicated, layered, impossible to untangle. Anger at the years of pain Madison had caused. Skepticism about whether this apology was genuine or just another attempt to be associated with Emma's success. But also something unexpected. Compassion. Not for the Madison who'd tormented her, but for the human being underneath who'd been so lost in her own insecurity that hurting others felt like survival. Emma thought about the person she'd become, about the platform she'd built on radical honesty and second chances, about the message she'd been spreading that people weren't defined by their worst moments. She could ignore Madison's message. She could publicly expose it and let her audience tear Madison apart. She could weaponize her platform the way Madison had weaponized her popularity, or she could do something harder. She could extend the same grace to Madison that she wished someone had extended to her younger self. Emma typed a response. "I appreciate you reaching out. What you did hurt me deeply. It shaped me in ways both painful and powerful. I'm not going to say it's okay, because it wasn't. But I believe people can change. I believe that recognizing the harm you caused is the first step toward becoming someone different. I hope your work with those anti-bullying programs is genuine. I hope you're actually helping kids avoid becoming who you were. That would be a better apology than any words." She paused, considering whether to send it. This felt vulnerable in a way that terrified her, but vulnerability had been her strength from the beginning. She added one more line. "For what it's worth, I forgive you. Not because you've earned it, but because I refuse to carry anger towards you anymore. It's too heavy and I have too much life left to live." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Madison's response came within minutes. "Thank you. I don't know what else to say except thank you." Emma closed the app and sat with the strange feeling of resolution. This wasn't a fairy tale ending where bully and victim became friends. This was just two people acknowledging a painful chapter and choosing to move forward differently. She realized that forgiveness wasn't about Madison at all. It was about Emma releasing the last piece of power Madison had held over her. The narrative in Emma's head, where Madison was the villain keeping Emma angry, keeping her tied to that moment in the cafeteria, keeping her defined by what had been done to her, rather than what she'd built despite it. That night, Emma added a postscript to her video in the form of a community post. Update. The person who called me useless reached out today to apologize. I'm sharing this not to praise her, but to say something important. Forgiveness doesn't mean what happened was okay. It doesn't mean trust is automatically restored. It means you're releasing the weight of someone else's actions so you can move forward lighter. You don't owe anyone forgiveness. But you owe yourself freedom from anger that serves no purpose except to keep you connected to your pain. Forgive for yourself, not for them. The post sparked another wave of discussion. Some people praised Emma's grace. Others argued Madison didn't deserve forgiveness. Some shared their own stories of forgiving people who'd hurt them. Others talked about why they'd chosen not to forgive and why that was equally valid. Emma read through the comments and felt grateful for the complexity of the conversation. This was what she'd wanted from the beginning, not to provide easy answers, but to create space for honest discussions about the messy, complicated reality of being human. A week later, Emma flew to Seattle for a keynote speech at a youth leadership conference. In the audience was a 15-year-old girl who reminded her so much of Lily, of herself, of everyone who'd ever felt invisible. After the speech, the girl approached nervously. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. Emma nodded, already knowing this would be important. "I brought a bottle of pills to school yesterday. I was going to take them in the bathroom during lunch, but my friend showed me your video instead, the one about being called useless, and I realized that if you could survive what you survived and become this, maybe I could survive too. Maybe my story doesn't have to end in a high school bathroom." The girl's eyes were wet but determined. "I flushed the pills. I told my parents what I'd been planning. I'm starting therapy next week, and I wanted to thank you for staying alive long enough for me to find you." Emma's professional composure shattered. She pulled the girl into a hug and let herself cry. This was why everything had happened the way it did. This was why the pain had been necessary. Not because suffering built character, but because surviving it and sharing that survival created lifelines for people still drowning. After the girl left, Emma sat alone in the empty auditorium, thinking about the interconnected web of human experience. How Madison's cruelty had pushed Emma to a breaking point that became a breakthrough. How Emma's breakthrough had created content that saved Lily. How Lily's transformation had inspired the mentorship program. How the program had generated the video that reached this girl in Seattle. How this girl would go on to live a life that would touch other lives in ways none of them could predict. Pain didn't happen in isolation, but neither did healing. Every person who chose to transform their suffering into something that could help others was creating ripples that spread farther than they'd ever know. Emma pulled out her phone and recorded a voice memo to herself, something she'd been doing since that first night 5 years ago. "Today, I met a girl who almost died, but chose to live because she saw herself in my story. I think about all the versions of how my life could have gone. The version where Madison's words destroyed me instead of fueling me. The version where I accepted the label and made it true. The version where I got my revenge by becoming cruel in return. But I'm grateful for this version, the one where I turned pain into purpose, where I refused to let someone else's opinion become my reality, where I built something that matters more than any temporary validation." She paused, watching the conference attendees filter back into the auditorium for the next session. "If you're listening to this years from now," she continued, "I hope you remember something. You were never useless, you were never broken, you were never too much or not enough. You were always exactly what you needed to be. The world just wasn't ready to receive you yet, but you didn't wait for the world's permission. You created space for yourself. You built something beautiful from the wreckage. And in doing so, you gave permission to thousands of others to do the same. That cafeteria moment with Madison wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning. The moment you learned that no one gets to define you but you. And that's a lesson worth every tear you cried, every doubt you wrestled with, every moment you wanted to give up but chose to keep going instead. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of us. I'm proud of everyone who refused to let cruelty have the last word." Emma saved the memo and stood up. She had another speech to prepare, another group of people to reach, another chance to turn someone's pain into possibility. As she walked out of the auditorium into the Seattle rain, she thought about that girl in the cafeteria 5 years ago, the one who'd been called useless and had run away crying. If Emma could go back and tell her anything, it would be this: the people who doubt you are doing you a favor. They're forcing you to stop seeking validation externally and start building it internally. They're teaching you that your worth isn't subject to popular vote. They're showing you who not to become. Emma had been called useless by someone who needed her to be small so they could feel big. She'd been dismissed, rejected, told she'd never matter, and she'd taken all of that pain and transformed it into a platform that had reached millions, saved lives, changed the trajectory of countless people who'd felt as lost as she once had. That wasn't revenge, that was alchemy, the transformation of suffering into gold. And every person watching Emma's journey was learning that they had that same alchemical power inside them, the power to take the worst thing anyone had ever said to them and use it as fuel to become someone those people never imagined they could be. Not out of spite, not out of a need to prove anything, but out of a deep understanding that living authentically despite rejection was the most radical act of resistance available. Emma opened her umbrella and walked into the rain, thinking about all the people she'd reached and all the people still waiting to find her message, thinking about Madison and Lily and that girl in Seattle and every person who'd ever been told they were too different to matter. She smiled. They'd all been called useless at some point, and they'd all proven that word meaningless through the simple act of refusing to believe it. That was the real story. Not the cruelty, not the rejection, but the choice that came after. The choice to rise, to build, to become, to matter. Not because someone gave them permission, but because they'd stopped asking for it. Emma Richards had been called useless. What she did next changed everything.